Crank up the volume and get ready for real-world bird hunting by listening to the Wingmen podcast by Eastman's. Now your host, Todd Helms.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Wingmen podcast, and it is my pleasure to be sitting here with Ed Arnett from TRCP. Ed is TRCP's chief scientist, has been for a while. Ed has his bio literally reads like, I don't know, if you could create a pedigree for a scientist for an NGO, that would be the one I'd be looking for. And he's even a dog guy, or a lab guy of all things. And Ed, you and I are gonna go hunt some sage grouse here in a couple weeks. And I just wanted to have you on the podcast and talk TRCP, talk sage grouse, talk hunting, dogs, and just, let's get into it. And thank you, first and foremost, for taking some time this afternoon and jumping on with me.
Oh, absolutely, Todd. Great to be with you.
Cool. So, you've been a biologist. You've been working in wildlife biology for a long, long time. How did you get your start doing that?
Well, kids often have that dream of being a fireman or a policeman or something to that effect, and usually they change their mind after a while. I grew up watching a gentleman named Marlin Perkins with Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, who many of your listeners will know. Yeah, you're old enough to know. Okay. The contemporary would be Jack Hanna. And I loved being outside, loved going hunting with my grandpa, and just knew I wanted to do whatever those guys were doing on Mutual of Omaha, and I just followed that dream. And right out of high school, what really kind of solidified it, I grew up in South Central Illinois, so we're both kind of Midwesterners. You on the northern end, me a little further south.
I won't hold Illinois against you.
Please don't. Vice versa. I took a trip with my grandparents when I was like 12 years old, and that just solidified it moving out west. Got to see Yellowstone and just a whole bunch of things along the way. And right out of high school, I went to school in Colorado, a little school out west in western Colorado Mountain College. Then I went to Bozeman to Montana State, and things just started solidifying that this is really what I want to do for a living. And it all started with my roots in hunting and getting outside with my grandpa, hunting and fishing, and just a love of animals. And figured out you could turn that into a profession, and kind of followed that dream to its end. So that's how the start came about, and then just continued going to school. I felt like I was a professional student forever. I think I went 12 years in a row.
Wow. Yeah.
to school, and then took a break and went back later in life and got a doctorate degree, and just kind of bounced around and worked a lot of different positions in the wildlife profession as a whole. So I've worked in management realm and the science realm, and now I'm doing the policy thing with TRCP.
Right.
So done a little bit of everything.
No, good for you. Yeah, just reading through your bio, and you and I hadn't had it. We got connected through Brandon Mason and through some other folks, actually, to work on a sage grouse project that Wingmen's working on, and TRCP's jumped on board with that along with a few other folks. And you and I are going to get to be able to go down and share some time together in the sagebrush in Wyoming and chase some sage grouse around.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that and the conversations, and I really appreciate Eastman's taking this on and doing this project. This is a critter that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and an ecosystem that doesn't get enough either. The redheaded stepchild of habitats that are out there. But as you darn well know, sagebrush is critically important. It provides so many things to so many different entities, if you will, for wildlife, for ranchers, and for the various industries. It's a really important ecosystem, and not a lot of people know about it. So it's the more we beat that drum and get the message out, the better. So I'm really looking forward to it and appreciate you guys doing the project.
No, absolutely. It's something that when we first started Wingmen, it was obviously a sage grouse hunt of some sort was in the talk right from the beginning, simply because, it's Wyoming. It doesn't get much more iconic in Wyoming than sagebrush habitat, sage grouse, mule deer, pronghorn antelope, everything that you, and then the songbirds. I mean, we could go list a zillion different things, but we knew
350 plus.
350 plus.
There's more than 350 species of plant and animals that depend on that ecosystem.
No. I'm glad you did, because I didn't have that number, and I'm glad that the biologist was able to supply that. So no, that's awesome. But yeah, it was a story that we knew we wanted to tell, but it's evolved into something greater. The sage grouse it's more than just a bird in today's world, and facing ESA listings and increased regulation. Unfortunately, there's some politics involved that an awful lot of politics. And I don't think a lot of folks understand that. I don't think a lot of folks realize that. And that became pretty, in the last year and a half, as we're starting to lay the groundwork for this story, it went from, let's go hunt some sage grouse, to, well, let's tell a conservation story, to, wow, this is more than a hunt. It's more than a conservation story. This is more like a documentary on a rapidly, for lack of a better word, maybe deteriorating situation. Am I correct in thinking that?
It's getting more and more challenging. And, when I think back on a variety of things that I've witnessed and have read about and learned and studied over the years in my 30-plus year career, history is replete with examples of how we have to wait. We just push things to the to the end, right to where that looming hammer of the ESAs looming over the top, and that makes things much harder and more expensive to deal with. And now what we're really seeing is a continued loss of habitat, but part of it's what I kind of call demonic intrusion. We've got these demons out there in the cheatgrass and wildfire cycles that are just eating our lunch in the Great Basin. So for all the good work that's been done and the planning, and we can get into that later, and some of the politics, because there's no doubt politics when you start bringing the ESA into the fold and the discussion. It's hard to keep up when you're losing millions of acres annually to these fires. And that's, driven, whether people believe in climate change or not. You can't argue it's dry out there, and that we've got bigger fires, more extensive more hot fires, more extensive. And we've altered that fire regime such that they're burning more frequently. And sagebrush, it's kind of like, I think Mark Twain was quoted as saying, it's an old growth forest in miniature form. It lives a long time, and it takes a long time to recover. And in fact, some of the historic fires only occurred every 130 plus to every 300 years, depending on the system and the soil conditions and those kinds of things. And now we may see those that fire cycle is much shorter. So we're bouncing around here a little bit, but I think, yes, it has become a much more complicated and difficult situation, partly because we pushed it out along, till we had only a few 100,000 birds, and we had a proposal for a listing. And so we waited a little long to begin with, and now we're seeing this fire cycle in the Great Basin and other factors across the range of the species that are making it harder for us. And just to add one bit of color here, so folks know on sage grouse, I say this anytime every biologist has to have that one floor elevator speech, we call it, ready to go when somebody says, why the hell should I care about sage grouse? And the reality is the fact that a once widely distributed, very abundant, and liberally harvested game bird was even proposed for listing by the Endangered Species Act should concern every hunter, every person in the public, every politician, everyone. That should be a red flag that something's amiss. And so that's one of my taglines for why we should care. It's like something is wrong with this ecosystem if a game bird like that is now being proposed for listing.
And you say that, I think back about the history of that, a bird that was so plentiful, in fact, that when they built the Union Pacific Railroad, the workers basically made a demand like, you can only feed us sage grouse twice a week. That's all they were feeding them. There were that many birds. They were so plentiful, so easy to get. It was, literally the chicken of the Great Basin, and they fed it to them. And, to be completely honest, I can think of other birds I'd rather eat than a sage grouse. I do enjoy them. But yeah, if you had to eat them every single day, I could see that. But just to illustrate your point, yeah, there should be some red flags popping up when we go from that to where we are now. And I think as an ecosystem we're looking at mule deer populations across the board in the state of Wyoming that are under objective. Literally, I don't think there's a single management unit in the state that's at or above objective. They're all at or below objective. And so a lot of that sage grouse habitat is mule deer habitat as well, especially winter range. And so, I think you're right. Asking that question, what's going on? What's the deal? We think we've got some factors, some ideas, but, coming at it from your perspective, from a scientist perspective, what are your thoughts? What do you think?
Well, the key threats are a little different between the western half of the range and the Great Basin and in where we're sitting, you in Wyoming, me in Colorado. Here it's largely driven by disturbance from oil and gas development, urbanization, some urban developments. There are other threats as well. It's not that we don't have fires in this region, but we have more development in the oil and gas fields. We're seeing lots of wind energy farms going in. There's just lots going on in our landscape. And there are conifer trees that are encroaching. That happens in the Great Basin as well. Out west, or it's in the Great Basin, the threats are primarily cheatgrass and fire that we kind of started talking about. But also feral horses and burros are a big issue, particularly in a state like Nevada. So there's lots of factors, and quite honestly, there were disease issues at one point for sure. I haven't tracked lately if there are continued. West Nile virus was the big one. That had links to oil and gas industry and the open water pits and stuff, but the factors are different. But kind of the bottom line is we've lost about half of the sagebrush ecosystem in its entirety. We're down to about 55% of the historic amount of sagebrush across what was then about 14 states where sage grouse occupied. They're extinct now in Nebraska, New Mexico, Arizona, probably very small populations there anyway. And they've been in decline for some time. And when you look at the long-term trends of population estimates, they've been declining at about what's now estimated about 3% a year. But that's all related to habitat. I mean, you're a bird hunter. You know how it goes, man. When the habitat's in good shape, following good precipitation years, we're going to get into birds big time because the habitat conditions come on. But, we've seen state transition of the habitats, and what I mean by that is the vegetation has just changed. The sagebrush is there, but maybe the vegetation underneath, the forb component and the grass component's changed. This is not a dig on current landowners and livestock grazers, but we had 100+ years of grazing that was not always managed to the proper extent. So that could have changed and did change likely vegetative compositions. There's just a lot of moving parts in the ecosystem. The bottom line is the habitat has declined and the birds are going to decline with it. Right. Yeah. Grouse, no matter what kind of grouse we're talking about, aren't exactly known for resiliency when it comes to habitat change. I saw that growing up in the upper Midwest, where the habitat we did very well in hunting ruffed grouse was always second growth, and it seemed like it was always in the 5 to 15 year cycle. Yep. That young stage. Yep. There were birds on, and grouse are cyclical too, as most bird hunters understand the population cycles. And I saw that firsthand growing up, that you'd have
every about 7 years, you'd have a big boom in rough grouse numbers. And if you were hunting that young growth stuff, it was phenomenal. You did really, really
you
well.
were going to get your birds.
And so when that kind of stuff disappears, back there it was forestry practices had a big role to play, and it kind of seemed like as went the rough grouse, so went the woodcock. And I don't know, man, it's interesting, but sage grouse, I can see a lot of parallels there, and just looking at it going, there's definite things you could put your finger on. You talk about the feral horses. I saw that this spring. We were doing let counts down south of Casper, between Casper and Rawlins, Wyoming, and
Shirley Basin.
Yeah,
country.
we were on the Pathfinder Ranch down there, and we were helping with let counts, and it was amazing. The first lek we were counting in the first morning, we're sitting there watching the birds, and all of a sudden, a dozen feral horses come over the ridge, and the ranch manager was none too pleased, and he started pointing out the habitat, and he said, we haven't had cattle in this pasture but there hasn't been cattle on this lease in over a year. And it looked like it'd been grazed right down to nothing all year long, and it was straight up from the horses. So that
from the horses,
you're taking forbs out of the equation then, because they're eating everything in sight, and they have a tendency to just sit in one place and destroy it instead of moving across the landscape like cattle or bison would. It's interesting. Like you said, a lot of components.
Yep. And tillage too. There was a lot of ag conversion that was a big problem in Montana and North Dakota and some of that region. And to that point, I can always remember this graphic. They call it the reverse hockey stick, because some of the researchers that work on this, because it doesn't take much disturbance in a landscape, like from ag tillage or other conversion, from whatever, pick your favorite disturbance and development, to see a really steep decline in the birds. They're very sensitive. They're a big landscape bird. They're not like pheasants and quail, which like that diversity. Right. Crops here and then some cover and mixtures, lots of edge in between. That's not sage grouse. Not to say they don't like edge. I mean, you can have sagebrush that's too thick. And you've been out in those situations. I know you have. Probably you're not going to see sage grouse. You're just too damn thick. But they like big landscapes. Sharp-tailed grouse, same thing. Prairie chickens and sharpies are acclimating a little better. It seems like you can kill them in wheat stubble and out in the middle of a cut cornfield. Chickens anyway, and I pass shoot prairie chickens every once in a while, flying in and out of those. That's not true. That's not
no. And it was growing up. We had sharp tails too, and they're an interesting bird because they're so widespread as far as a grouse goes. We had them. A lot of folks think of them. Oh, they're a prairie bird. You shoot them in the Dakotas and in Nebraska, eastern Wyoming, Montana. And it was like, no, we had them in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and it was like, we had lots of them.
They still hunt them there too.
They didn't for a few years. They closed that season for a few years, and then through the efforts of sportsmen out counting leks and helping biologists as much as they could, they realized, wow, these birds have bounced back to the point where we need to lobby for a hunting season, and they got one. And it was, when I was a kid, you go out and I think you could shoot three or five of them or something like that. And we always started the season doing that because the woods were too thick to hunt upland birds. You couldn't see anything. So we hunted sharptail. And then when I moved out west, we had lots of sharptail, and I lived in a place in northeast Wyoming where you couldn't shoot sage grouse. And I remember the first time I saw them, I was out hunting sharptail, walking them up, and these 5 birds flush at 30 yards out in front of me, and they got up, and I'm like, those are not sharptail. And I knew immediately what I was looking at, but they were a rarity there.
Yeah, that's up in the Powder River, I assume. I remember when that unit was open, And I went up there antelope hunting one year. I think it was 2003, and it was closed then. And I want to say it has opened back up. I haven't looked at the regs this year. I usually hunt in section one, the main part of the state, and I just don't even go up there. I wouldn't even feel good about shooting.
Well, and good luck finding them. It's heavily private, and there's just not a lot of birds there. And to begin with, it's you're kind of on that fringe for the habitat right there, because it's where the sagebrush habitat kind of starts and the prairie kind of ends. And so it's interesting. It's a transition zone, and I never did see a lot of birds there, but occasionally. But since I moved into into northwest Wyoming, we see lots of sage grouse, and not like the old timers talk about, and not like Guy and Ike Eastman talk about when they were young men or younger, that they talk about there's not the birds that there used to be. Yeah.
Well, in your neck of the woods there, and where we're going to end up hunting all the way down through that, main core of the habitat, those are strong
right.
And there's still good numbers of birds. There's still big expanses of sagebrush, but we're losing opportunity though all the time. I know we'll get into discussion some hunting season and such, but that's one thing that has not been identified as a major threat by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, by the states, and by most of us NGOs that work in this space. Hunting is not a major threat, and if it is, we're not thinking about the root cause of the problem, which is always going to be habitat and habitat quality.
Well, you segued beautifully, because that's exactly where I wanted to go, was talking about hunting. There was a recent meeting by one of the working groups in Wyoming considering sage grouse, talking about kind of like a limited quota type scenario, where almost like with sandhill cranes here, where you have to apply for a tag, or turkeys where you'd have to apply to hunt sage grouse and draw a tag. I think I'm on the fence about that. It's one of those things where I read the article, I got thinking about it, I thought, well, it's an interesting idea. And knowing what you just said about, hunting really doesn't have a big impact, but yet they released their estimated harvest data, and the public kind of went,
yeah, they saw the thousands of numbers.
7,000 birds, and it's like, but if we look at overall mortality, if we look at overall what that current stronghold population can withstand, we're not taxing that resource.
Yeah, and I think the key thing there, and hunting hasn't been demonstrated to have that population level effect everywhere. It can. There's no question. I think one thing people need to understand is that sage grouse are not pheasants and quail. They're a different critter. They have very high overwinter survival, and they're pretty hardy birds. So they're far longer lived than bobwhite quail, for example, and certainly our exotic species like pheasants and huns and chukars, which are much more susceptible to winters and fluctuate more so than sage grouse do. So they have to be managed more conservatively. Back in the day when I was going to grad school at the University of Wyoming and I first started hunting sage grouse, it was a 3 bird a day limit, 9 in possession for a couple of months, as I recall, and it's just gotten more and more conservative ever since, in response to the populations and the loss of habitat. So I think the state wildlife agencies have done their job well in terms of tracking how they can manage long-term sustainable harvest, but all the while trying to deal with this loss of habitat so we can have those long-term sustainable harvestable populations and reasonably liberal, so we don't have to go to the permit system. And Wyoming isn't going to go to it this year, but they're going to contemplate it next year. Part of the problem in the estimates, a lot of these estimates, Todd, and you very likely know this, are pretty crude at best. For pheasants in Nebraska, what do you look up in Nebraska when you look at the game bird outlook? It's the rural mail carrier routes that they count birds as they drive their mail carriers. It's not a grand piece of science there, but it's a long-term index. They do the routes the same way, so there's some level of standardization to it, but it's still one piece of a very complex puzzle to estimate populations. The wings that we put in our wing barrels, and I would strongly encourage everybody that shoots grouse to go find a wing barrel and put those wings in the wing barrel, because the biologists really need that data, because now they're getting sex and age ratios that help them estimate the population. So there's just a few pieces that we're able to gather, and then the lek counts you mentioned earlier. The males are have very strong fidelity. They go back to those places year after year after year. There's biases in counting that, in counting birds, depending on who's doing the counting and how many times you go, and the factors that are associated with light and that kind of thing. The weather, lots of things influence the ability to see all of the males there, but you can't count the females.
That you hit that nail on the
you're
head.
Estimating. You're estimating the females. Guesstimating.
No, you're absolutely right, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Ed, but I just want to kind of illuminate that point about not being able to count the females. The one lek that we were counting this last spring, we didn't bother the birds. I mean, we were not hindering them at all, but we were close enough with good binoculars and glass where we could see everything that was going on. And some of the video and pictures that we got are outstanding. And the ranch manager that we were with, he's like, wow, there's like 10 more males here today than there was yesterday.
Yeah.
And he goes, all right, now, and they stick out, big white blobs out there on the prairie, and the leks have a tendency to be pretty open. And he said, all right, now try to count the females. And
hard, isn't it?
No way. And there was one big old boss rooster, I guess you'd call him. I don't know. And he had almost all the hens were right with him, and they just looked like clumps of sagebrush, and they weren't really moving around. And then they'd shuffle a little bit, and you lose count. And I think, man, that right there is an example of, I am not sure we really have any idea exactly how many birds we have. I mean, we know that the trend, there's not as many as there used to be, but putting exact numbers to it,
right? That's
tricky.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of variables that go into it and a lot of bias, and it's just hard to count those. You just don't count the females.
Right.
They're very cryptically trying to get in and out of the lek with all the dancing that's going on and all the activity and calling. They're trying to get in and get bred and get out before they get hit by a golden eagle or a red-tailed hawk or another predator. So it's an estimate, and that wing data that comes in gives you an estimate of the ratio of males to females, and that's kind of what they use. So if you get an estimate on the leks, males and then they multiply that out by that ratio, estimate the number of females, and there's your best estimate of a population, of a total population size.
Right.
So that back to that meeting you were talking about, what hadn't been done yet was what was a very necessary piece of information, was what that estimated population size was based on last year's harvest data coupled with this year's spring data. So when people heard 7,600 birds, that was out of context. Right. And it's worse when if you're just talking about how many wings were in barrels. I know people that got all excited about hundreds of wings of hens in the barrels, and it's completely out of context. But the key thing, I think, with sage grouse, aside from the fact that they're not the same as other game birds, oftentimes people hear terms called additive and compensatory mortality. And what that means in a nutshell is, if it's compensatory, it's just like it sounds, it's compensating for other forms of natural mortality, particularly of juveniles in a given year. So that's as opposed to additive, which is adding to those natural forms of mortality. So what the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and the state of Wyoming is part of that, what the biologists have and the science has generally said that generally less than 10%, some suggest 5%, and depends on the subpopulation you're talking about. Some of them just get plain hammered. I mean, think of your favorite honey hole, and if you see people going out there all the time hammering the same broods, it may need a different kind of management. Hunting may have an additive effect. It may not, but it's going to be different from one population to the next. But that additive mortality seems to kick in above 10%, according to the science. But there's also a timing factor in there where the birds that are harvested after, and some of the science I've seen on it suggests after about the first week of October, now the birds have kind of gotten through that period where they're more susceptible to mammalian predators, avian predators, and other sources of natural mortality, to where harvest can become additive. So again, I think the states have tried to time this, at least recently. In Montana, they had a 3-month season for a long time. I cannot remember. I didn't go check their regs, and I should, because I'm thinking about heading up there sometime this fall. But they were a 3-month season. I think they dropped it down to a couple months, and I don't know where they're at today. They may just be a month. But Wyoming went from that longer season. Hell, they started shooting grouse when I never hunted them in August, but I heard you could start hunting them in August at one time.
I'd heard the same thing.
Yeah, so now we're in that mid to late September period for 2 weeks where theoretically, and according to the data that are out there, that should fall into that compensatory range. And my understanding in talking to the biologists with the state, that they think based on last year's harvest data coupled with this spring's let count data, that the harvest was right around 6.5%. But there are areas, I know one that I'm not going to take you to because I think it just gets pounded. And I'm not even going to hunt it this year. I start getting that guilt trip going where it's like, well, these birds late in the season have probably been hit about 4 times. I think I'll go find somebody that hasn't been harassed. And you can find those pockets of sage grouse in a number of places. You just got to go look for them. So those are important concepts on the additive versus compensatory. And some would say the jury's still out, but we're kind of working with what data we have. And some species don't get any let counts or any estimates. There's just a season on blue grouse, dusky grouse, they now call them. I stick with blues. I'm a traditionalist. I hate those name changes.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that feels that way.
Oh man, I just don't say blue. I just don't say duskies, but I feel like I have to here because somebody might not know what the hell a blue grouse is. But there's no estimates on those. Very few anyway. So.
Well, good luck. Good luck counting.
Makes it
good
challenging.
Luck counting dusky grouse or rough grouse or something like that. They go out. I know they can do hoot counts or drumming counts or things like that where they go out and they listen for them. But you're just hearing one male or 2 males or 3 males. You're not seeing the birds, and so and honestly, I think the number of mountain grouse guys. It's just not there. There's people that do it, and I'm one of them
religiously. But
you just don't see them there. Unless you've got a dog and you can catch those birds out in the open early, where they're out eating grasshoppers in the sagebrush or on big open, wide open parks, you're hunting them in pretty thick timber, and they, as well as I do, they just have a propensity to just fly up on a limb and look at you. And it kind of loses it.
I think you
swatting them off a limb with a 12 gauge loses its luster,
You probably have killed more with blunts on your arrows bow hunting as I did when I bow hunted. That's with a gun.
There's always a bird tip or 2 in my quiver while I'm elk hunting. Always. Yep.
When I was in grad school, I did bighorn sheep work in encampment on the encampment herd. And come September 1st, I started driving my own personal truck because I always carried a pistol with me. Couldn't carry that in the government rig. And I always carried my .22 pistol with me, and I probably shot more blues with a pistol than I ever have with a shotgun.
I believe that.
Poor broke student,
You're a poor student, and they eat good.
Oh, they're good
Yes,
eating
extremely, extremely. But yeah, that's a hunt that it opens tomorrow. That opens tomorrow. So at least here in Wyoming, it opens tomorrow. I don't know what it does in Colorado, but
Colorado's open tomorrow too.
I think most places in the West are
September
September 1st. But
Yep.
It was funny. Guy walked by a minute ago, and before we started chatting, and he's like, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I don't have an elk tag. I've got a general tag, but it doesn't start till the 15th of September for me. And I said, I don't know, probably going up, taking the kids up on the mountain someplace and chasing grouse around and making archery elk hunters mad someplace.
I irritated a few last year, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things that
the joy of public lands, everything.
That multiple use philosophy gets strained once in a while, But no, that's super cool. Well, I'm stoked to hunt with you later on, in a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's coming up quick.
It is. So you're a dog guy. One of the things that people may or may not know about you is that, set all the science and everything aside, and you're a dog guy. You've been a judge, AKC judge. You've been a master hunter judge. I mean, what are you running right now? Are you running labs, or do you have some pointing dogs?
I have 2 labs, and one is still functional. The old gal would probably lie to you and tell you she's functional, but she's pushing 14. She hunted last year though, and hunted pretty damn hard. It's just you don't hunt the older dogs every day. But I have 2 chocolate labs, and I just switched it up a little bit and got a poodle pointer.
No kidding.
So I kept my brown dog theme, because this little guy is dark brown. But I'm trying a versatile, so I'm switching teams a little bit here. But I've been looking at getting a pointing breed, and then I decided to go with a versatile, and because I hunt ducks a lot too, I hunt everything, all birds, and I went with this poodle pointer breed because I just read a lot about it. I confirmed it with my buddy Ronnie Bame, who runs the Hunting Dog podcast. Ronnie and I are friends, and I've hunted Sage Grouse before, and I asked him about it, and I've asked a number of friends, and no one has said don't get a poodle pointer. They all said they're great dogs, smart, easy to train, really, really good to hunt with. So, and I like this dog so far. He's really good. But I started with labs, and I hadn't always been a dog guy. When I grew up in the Midwest hunting small game, like every kid in the Midwest does. But my grandfather was my hunting mentor. Never knew my dad, and my grandpa was my de facto dad, and he started taking me hunting when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, just to go. And he never had a dog. And when I started hunting with him officially when I was 10 years old, still didn't have a dog. We didn't even have a beagle to run rabbit. He loved to hunt rabbits and squirrels. So we were equal opportunity predators on the small game front. You kick a brush pile, and if a cockbird comes out, you kill it, or you shoot at it anyway, or covey a quail. But most of the time you're hunting, furred small game. And I got into hunting birds when I moved to Wyoming or Montana, and then going to school there, and then in Wyoming, that's when I first hunted sage grouse, but still not without a dog. But when I moved to Oregon in 1990 and started my professional career, I started with the Forest Service, and I went on a duck hunt with this guy. And I'd hunted ducks in Montana. I wrote kind of a funny story about the day I decided to buy a dog. This is all true. I used to shoot ducks up in Montana, but I'd retrieve them with a damn fishing pole and a great big hook. Man, you know how that goes when you don't have a dog. You got to get them out of that deep water.
Been there and done that. Yeah.
Get you a big snagging hook. And one day I went duck hunting with a guy, fellow biologist. He had Chesapeake Bay Retrievers, and I was fascinated by that dog. He had it trained to handle, and she marked and was really well, marked doubles and triples, and was quiet in the blind. And I was just fascinated. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. But I wasn't quite ready to get a dog, so I went hunting a couple weeks later and shot a couple of mallards out in the lake, and then went, oh, now what am I going to do? I forgot my pole. So you can imagine what I ended up doing, because I don't leave game in the woods. And swimming back buck naked, I'm yelling at myself, "I'm buying a damn dog!" And I bought a little chocolate lab that I didn't want a Chesapeake. I had no particular reason why, other than some of the aura that surrounds them. But I went with a brown lab. They're kind of the underdogs. They always got a bad rap and continue to do so. But I got some good ones. I got a particularly good one. My second dog. He was kind of my Tom Brady, I call him, or my Aaron Rodgers, pick your favorite quarterback. He was really good. But I got into that hunt test game and training, and I did that for a long time. And I still play the game. I still judge. I just haven't run my dogs. Just life got so busy, and I travel so much. It's just hard to train. I always tell my friends, freaking biologist, man, I haven't got enough time to train, and I don't make enough money to pay a trainer. So I just get them trained up to go fetch up my birds, and we hunt. I hunt a lot with my dogs.
That's awesome. So. Yeah, we had Chad Carmen on talking about doing hunt test stuff, and he's up in Missoula, and he's a big hunt test guy. And then I had the guys from Boomtown HRC down in Casper. They were on, and of course they're like, "Yeah, you got to get that new puppy and hunt test, man. You got to do all this." And I'm like, I have 3 little kids, and I live in the middle of nowhere, and the closest hunt test to me is 2.5 hours away.
It would cost you a fortune to get it.
I like the idea of doing it, and I just said, I told my wife, I said, if we lived closer to where there was a bunch of hunt tests going on, I'd do it. Yep. I think it would be fun.
And that was Oregon. There were plenty of clubs, lots of tests, plenty of training grounds, good opportunity. If you don't have all that, you're going to throw money down the toilet. Well, potentially, because the dogs have to be able to pass the test. Plus, they're running about $100 now.
And travel and hotel rooms and
travel
food and
exactly.
Yeah, it's just a lot. And like I said,
but it's fun.
I would totally do it if I had closer stuff and I didn't have kids. If I didn't have 3 little kids, right, wife and I'd be traveling with those dogs every weekend, going someplace. That would be a ball. But yeah, I'm in the. But
but you can still train them.
You
can still train them to do the game. That's the key. So,
and that's what I'm in the middle of right now, is training. Hondo is, what is he? About 4.5 months, and we are throwing lots of marks. Little bit of live bird introduction,
obedience,
tons of obedience, tons
of
obedience.
Yep.
I think. I bought him from Southern Oak Kennels, Barton Ramsey, and that was one of the things Bart and I talked about on a previous podcast was, I think like 90% of problems with dogs in the field are obedience problems.
I completely agree with that.
And that's been my experience with my own dogs and with other people's dogs. And so just trying to make, like, this dog is going to be, if I can help it, this dog is going to be rock solid in obedience. I had something happen, and I did a solo podcast last week talking about this, but I had something happen 3 weeks ago. We were down fishing a local river and brought the dogs home, and man, by that evening, both of my dogs, my old dog who's 9 and my pup who's a pup, had just explosive diarrhea. And it went.
They got into something.
Immediately, I'm thinking, got into something. Don't know what it was, but we got into something. And the little dog, the pup, went from that to being like lethargic. And I told my wife, I'm like, we got to go to the vet. And I said, this isn't just a bug. There's something more. There's something more to this.
Right.
Took him in, got him on some meds. We did some stuff, and he got cleared up. I think a day and a half, he was fine, but he wasn't quite himself for that whole week. He was lethargic. And I told my wife, I'm like, I'm not training. I'm not even going to just get him better.
Yeah.
Just let him get better. Miss a week, big deal. Who cares? I'm going to get him better. Well, then come to find out, this local body of water, the reservoir that it drains, had a cyanobacterial bloom.
Cyanobacteria died. Yeah, all right.
And there were
There's
cattle
your root
that
cause.
died and the whole ball of wax. And I'm going, my dog's got cyanobacterial poisoning. Holy smokes.
Yep. I've never had that happen, but my wife constantly is warning me when we come up to stock tanks and stuff about keeping the dogs out. She's worried about it. And it can be a big issue for sure.
Absolutely. But, yeah, and it's something I didn't really give much thought to in the Midwest. And you know, I'm in the river. We were trout fishing. We were in a drift boat, and I'm not thinking anything of it. And then come to find that out, and I was like, oh, my gosh. So, yeah, when I'm running watermarks now, I'm always checking the advisories to see where there's blooms and what's going on. And holy smokes. But if I'd have let that go, there's no doubt in my mind that puppy probably would have died, you know.
Probably would have killed him,
but
That's,
crazy.
If you, I'm just curious, I'll ask you a question. What do you think about the snake vaccine, the rattlesnake vaccines? What's your take on that? Because I'm ready to ask my vet his opinion. I'm curious.
Well, I give it. My pup isn't old enough quite yet to get the first. Or did he? No, he's not old enough yet to get the first round. I think they wait till 6 months. But my old dog, gets it. When I first got the Mackinaw, the old dog, the vet that I was using didn't administer it. He didn't think it was worth it. He said, I don't think the research proves anything. I think it's a scam, basically. Every other vet that I've talked to said, even if it is a scam, it's added insurance for your dog.
Places we hunt might be the difference between getting them into Lander or Matiti or wherever to a vet or bags.
And that's exactly my thoughts. I thought, if the dog gets bit and doesn't have the vaccine, it's 50-50.
Right.
Because we're a long ways from a vet. It can be hours.
Sometimes hours, exactly. And if you don't have cold packs, I always carry cold packs. Because that's the key thing is getting this blood slowed down.
Exactly.
On a bite.
And you're probably like me, I carry I've got that Gundog Outdoors first aid kit. Have you seen those?
I haven't, but I've been thinking about starting to look. I've got my own homemade one. My vet supplies me with stuff, but maybe maybe you've now talked.
I've added to it a little bit, but it's sweet. It's sweet, and it's blaze orange. I mean, you just look in the back of your rig, and there it is. But yeah, it's Gundog Outdoors is the one that I have. Alex Langbell is the owner of that. He was on the podcast a while back, and he sent me one, and it's sweet. It's a really cool deal, really complete. He did a lot of research with vets in that, and it's a good one. It's a good one. So
I'll check him out. I'll tell him Todd sent me. Maybe he'll send you another one.
Never know. Never know. But it's a pretty cool one. But you're right, man. So I let the dogs. I make them get it, or don't make them get it. I just take them and get it. Yeah, right. And because it's one of those things for me, it's kind of like we're so far from vets that I'm gonna hedge my bets on that one.
It's an insurance policy.
Yep. And it doesn't have any adverse effects. It would be one thing if, we can give them this rattlesnake shot, but there's a pretty strong chance there's a chance that your dog's going to have complications, or it could lead to renal failure, or it could do this, and it's like, I might hedge my bets a little bit, because between you and me, my dogs see 90% of their use when there's no snakes out. I'm hunting, and I'll take them up in the mountains in September, hunt sage grouse a couple of times, and otherwise they don't hit the ground for upland birds until it's cold.
The country. Yeah. It's partly why I go to the sandhills a fair bit, because the snakes aren't well distributed there, because they don't have any place to den.
Oh.
They can't den up in those sandy dunes. So I spend some time, but you can still run into them. I've never, in all these years, I can't even do the math between 1991 and now, but it's, that's 40 years, 30 years, 40. Anyway, in all the years I've been running dogs, I know I'm tired. I can't even do math in my head. But regardless, all the years, the decades I've been hunting dogs, I've never run into snakes but twice. And I saw them first before the dogs did. And I actually got a live correction on one when I brought the dog in, and he started nosing up, and I let him get just close enough to see it, and I let him up. And so that was my snaking. I haven't snaked them either. Snake proofed them. So, and I'm admitting things that I should probably do, get the vaccine and do a snaking program. But I try, I'm like you, I hunt mostly when they're already gone into hibernation, but there's always that chance. I ran into one in Montana that really caught me off guard because it really wasn't in a snaky looking place. And the dog had just flushed a covey of sharp-tails. We had a nice double out of it, and he came back and he was sniffing around, and I just kind of I could barely hear it. I bet you I couldn't hear it now because I'm older and I've lost half my hearing, but I probably couldn't hear that. But I did hear it that time, and I'm looking down in there, and it's like, what the hell is that? And I stick my head down in there, and it's a little baby, a little itty-bitty one. And it was close. That was the too close, another close call, but where I got the correction on it. He was out sunning himself, and it was late, actually. That was it was in late September, but it had been real cold. And this was kind of a warming day, and that damn thing was sitting out on the rock, so I saw it first. But anyway, I'm going to get the vaccine. You convinced me on this one, so at least for my puppy, because this dude's all over. I mean, he ain't like my labs. Even, labs have enough risk, but at least they're within 20, 30 yards. You know exactly where they're at. This little pointer's going to be all over the board.
Well, and you never know, too.
Which is what they're supposed to do.
Because you can't, in a lot of cases like that, where you got a big running dog, you might not see what happens. And he comes back, and you're like, man, what's wrong with my dog? And you're not going to see it. Like you said, with a lab, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see it happen because he's going to be pretty close, But well, that'll be I do. I've gotten mixed. I've gotten mixed. I guess reviews from different veterinarians, but lately what I'm hearing is why not? It doesn't.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom is why not?
It doesn't hurt your dog, so why not do it?
Right.
Yeah. And so I do. It's one of those things that it's kind of like, whew. I had some friends that bought our little ranch outside of Thermopolis, Wyoming, and they had a little Jack Russell Terrier that came with the ranch, and he just was kind of there. And they said, "What? You guys don't want this dog?" They're like, "No, he came with the ranch when we bought it, so you guys get him too, and he's a snake killer." And they're like, okay. They said they hadn't been there 3 days, and that dog is dragging this rattlesnake around, basically eating it.
Part mongoose.
And they said, wow, I wonder if he got bit. Well, shortly later, he swells all up and goes and lays in the shade. Well, they call the vet, and the vet's like, wait. He knew the dog, and he's like, oh, that dog's been bit about 25 times. Don't worry about it. He'll be better in about a day and a half.
And he was. That's really funny.
My labs aren't.
Swells up for a day, but
that's
he'll be
exactly
fine.
what happened. They were like, oh, yeah, give him a day and a half. He'll be okay. And he was. That's a Jack Russell, too. They're like different. That's a different kind of breed right there. Oh, my goodness.
Maybe they are part mongoose.
Man, who knows? But
but back real quick to the hunt test thing, though. I got to tell you, I miss the game. I really enjoy it, and I enjoy the people. But when I was breeding labs, I bred for a long while and had a kennel, and a small kennel, just a backyard kennel. But I sold good quality dogs, and everybody said, well, I don't want to do all that field trial and intestines. I just want a good hunting dog. It's like, well, what does that mean to you? A good hunting dog. And then we'd get into the conversation about obedience, marking, teaching them to mark, or, enhancing their instincts to mark, teach them to handle, having a good conservation tool with you. And, at the end of the day, they start seeing it's like, well, I don't have to go hunt test, but I should train my dog up so he's not a loose cannon jackass running around destroying the hunt and converting his name from Charlie to something in a four-letter word phrase, which we've all heard out in the marsh.
Absolutely.
At some point in our lives. So, I think that the training aspects, just kind of comes down to what people want, but if you just to say I want a good hunting dog, it takes a little work. You don't just crack them out of the box and they're good hunting dogs. You got to build those instincts and enforce that obedience, and then you'll have a pretty good hunting dog.
I agree with you 100%. It was interesting. I'm actually using Cornerstone Gundog Academy. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have heard of them. I am not familiar with them, but I've heard
they're
of them.
They're connected with Southern Oak Kennels. So I bought the dog and we're part of our puppy project that we're working on is walking through their 52 plus program with this dog. And it's the first time I've used kind of an updated training methods. I'd always train my dogs with the old Richard Walters book and
that's good.
Old school, But
old school. I started on that too, brother.
But I have to tell you, there's a lot of clicker treat stuff mixed in with this, and the results that I'm getting and the shortening of the learning curve, Ed, is unreal. We were having a little bit of trouble getting Hondo to actually just go in his crate, when you say kennel up or kennel. He was kind of hesitant, and I was like, well, we'll do it the same way we did everything else. We just did the clicker and the treat. Now I look at him like kennel, and he runs and he bounces off the back of the kennel. He goes in it so fast, because it's phenomenal. And so learning all those things just develops the dog into a more handleable, manageable, pleasurable animal to be around. And it was hilarious. When I was talking with Barton about that, he's like, oh man, since COVID, the sales of our program have gone through the roof because, dad goes to work during the day and he doesn't see the dog till he gets home. He takes it out in the yard, trains it, plays with it, does whatever. He's like, this dog's phenomenal. And his wife's at home with the dog and maybe a kid or whatever, and they're like, you don't see what that dog's like when you're not around. Well, then all of a sudden they're at home working from home, locked down, and they're like, man, my dog's a jerk. I got to do something different.
Funny, my wife says the same thing. It's the whole pecking order. I am on the top of the pecking order in our house, but this little poodle pointer I have is testing my wife's patience.
Really?
Time. I said, you got to be consistent with him, and the whole gig. You're gonna express some dominance over him, but she didn't want to do that. So that's interesting. I've not done the clicker piece. I've always been big on food treats. What the hell why would anybody not give a puppy food in training basic obedience? You get the response so
fast. No, and that was.
And it's just the old school field trial. You don't do that. And half the old school field trials ruin dogs anyway because they're burning them too much. They don't know how to use a collar.
Right. No, I completely.
Some,
right.
not all.
No, right. Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm not throwing anybody under the bus or anybody's training methods under the bus. I'm just saying, noticing what I used to do with two previous labs that were both really, really good, but took a lot more work to get to the same point where this pup's at right now. And I'm going, whoa,
Yeah, there's no need to do that. Yeah, if you got something better, I haven't looked into the clicking stuff. Maybe I better dive into that a little bit. But I definitely use food treats. I definitely have used.
So it's just one more level of reinforcement, So as soon as Hondo, if I say we're walking at heel and I stop, it's gotten to the point now where I don't even need to give a command. When I stop, he sits, and immediately when he does that behavior, click, and then reinforce with the treat. So the point where I can click and it's just building those levels of response and association has been pretty incredible to watch. He learned place in one session where I could send him from across the yard and boom, he'd hit that place board. And I'm just going, wow. That is amazing. It took like a week for the other dog to get it.
Well, that's what you want.
And here is a funny story. So I never truly place trained my old lab, Mackinac. I was always like, just right here, sit, and he'd be okay. And so I'm like, well, why not? I might as well work on it with him too and see if I can get it. No kidding, Ed. I'm working with Hondo and he's place training just beautifully. And I put him in the crate. I'm like, well, see if Mac will do it. And he's sitting there watching this the whole time. And I walk over and I look at it. He's looking at it. And I went, Mackinac, place. And he's sitting down at heel looking at me. And he walked over to the place board, looked at it. And he put one foot on it, sat down, and looked at me. This is a 9-year.
I thought you were going to tell me he's going to lift his leg.
No, he just put one. He put one front foot on it, and went, "Where's my treat?"
Yeah, that's funny.
I was like, "That's a 9-year-old veteran dog right there." He's like, "Yeah, I'm not jumping through those hoops. That's for the puppy." Holy smokes,
that's hilarious.
Well, it'll be interesting.
Well, it's good you're getting the response.
Yeah, no.
Oh, I'm just glad you're getting the response. That's great because now you can move even quicker. There's no need to stay on something any longer than you have to. Move on to the next.
Yeah,
step,
and then go back and reinforce occasionally and just build. And it's fun. Dog training is one of those things that I wish I did it more. Like I think I have my wife convinced to let's introduce a new puppy to the home every 4 years instead of every 9. Because I'm my old guy now.
That's a better
rotation. I think
better rotation. That's what I was looking to say.
Yeah,
exactly. Because I've got a 14 and a 10. The 10-year-old will hunt with. He still acts like he's a puppy and still in great shape. But now I've got a 6-month-old. So once, and you can get dog poor real quick. Old dog poor.
Yes.
If you're not going to put them down just because they don't hunt anymore, obviously.
No, 100%.
You can only have so many in your house.
Well, I will probably leave Hondo at home because I don't think we'll be at the point where he'll be ready to do anything other than like one-on-one stuff, really small level controlled. Right. I don't want to burn him. You know what I mean? I don't want to put him in a situation. I don't want to put him in a situation with a bunch of dudes and a bunch of other dogs and expect him to perform. That's not going to turn out well. But I might bring my old vet. I may bring Mackinac and just have another dog. And he's 9. He can upland hunt pretty well. If anything, he might be a little too fast still. He gets a little. We'll have to run him for a mile or two before we let him out.
Well, it's a good point on the young dogs because upland is a lot more complicated than waterfowl hunting, as you all know. That's a great place to start your puppy is waterfowl hunting. Not that you don't take them upland hunting, you just don't have any expectations. I give them usually 2 seasons before they start putting the pieces together, but it depends on how many wild birds you put in. The best upland dog I had died at 15 and hunted 15 seasons. Now, mind you, I'll caveat that his 15th season he retrieved 1 dove, but hey, I checked the box.
That's a hunt.
That's a hunt. But he was phenomenal. I never hunt tested that dog, but boy, was he my best upland dog because he saw so many freaking birds. We were in Nebraska, Kansas, hunting quail in Texas. And now that when we moved to Colorado, I mean, he got all those same states, plus Wyoming, Sage Grouse, plus Montana a few times. He saw birds.
That's cool.
Birds. And they put that repetition and those pieces together, and they just get better and better at it. So you're in a good position where you're at. I know there's plenty of good opportunities in Wyoming. And you can always buzz up to Montana or meet me over in Nebraska.
We'll have to do something.
Places to go.
And you're right. I think back when I first got Mackinac, I was in Sheridan, Wyoming when I first got him. And that's a lot different than Cody. It's a lot grassland, prairie. Yeah. We had a lot of sharptail. Didn't have any sage grouse. Well, some, but not very many to speak of. Didn't hunt them.
Not enough, yeah.
But they had a very, very robust bird farm operation that the Game and Fish runs where they release pheasants in selected pieces of public ground. And so I think I shot 63 or 64 roosters over Mackinac before he was a year old. I mean, he was like 6 months when the bird season opened. And same thing as you said, no
Perfect
expectations. Let's just go out, me and him, one-on-one. And if I'd have put him on the ground that's in that same ground at age 4 or 5, I probably wouldn't have had to fire a shot on those release birds. He'd have caught them all. But at 6 months old, he didn't have the program figured out. But as far as learning how to find birds and what to smell and what to look for, and then retrieving birds, having to mark birds and retrieve them pretty much independently, that was that accelerated him a lot. And then when I moved him onto waterfowl the next year, it was just that much easier. You know, it was like, I can see that bird right there. I don't have to go hunt for it in the brush most of the time. It's floating down the river. You know what I mean? And so it was a little bit easier, a little bit different. But yeah, the young dog,
that repetition,
and the young dog thing. You know, that's something that upland hunting that'll be a one-on-one scenario, just me and him. But that'll transition over into waterfowl too. You know, he's not going to go on those 6-man smoker hunts where it's chaos. You know, the blinds come flying open and everybody's sitting up and swatting geese out of the air, and it's chaos. I can't imagine what the sensory overload for a young dog, you know.
It has to be off the charts.
Yeah, and I just don't want that. We'll do little stuff here and there, you know. Definitely be getting him on birds, but it's not going to be. It's going to be very controlled, very easy going. But what other hunts do you have planned this fall?
Well, let's see. I'm not going to take my young poodle pointer dove hunting tomorrow morning. I think that would undo. I told my buddy Ronnie Bain when we were doing a podcast, I said that'll probably undo everything I just did for the last 3 months. So I'm going to go dove hunting in the morning, probably the next 3 mornings or 2 mornings, and then I'm going to go look for mountain sharptails in western Colorado, and probably chase some blue grouse. Sage grouse opens. I'll probably hunt a little bit before we meet up. Colorado opens on the 12th of September, so I may get a hunt in there. I may run over to the Sandhills. But then the big trips will be into Nebraska. I'm hearing Kansas is in decent shape this year. It may be worth running down to Kansas. But I also am pondering pretty hard to go up to Montana for a couple weeks, or at least maybe 7-10 days. So if I do that, I'll plan a loop to come down.
Do that.
And maybe in your neck of the woods and go hit some of the good hunting chucker country I know we all know of, but won't talk about.
There's a little bit of that around, but I don't. Those are spots that don't get talked about very much. But
I'm privy to that.
And that's something that I don't really do much of until later in the season when it's cold, because that's snaky country this time of year, and it's like, nah, I'll wait.
Yeah, before I connect with you guys, I'm probably gonna go look for a few chuckers and hunts, but I'm gonna be real careful.
Yeah.
I know some places around some hay meadows I can hunt on some private that you can catch them along those hay meadows. Not too
right.
big.
And Huns, and I don't know about what you're looking at, but Huns, it seems like you can find Huns in pretty cheat grass patches and that kind of country where I don't seem to run into a lot of snakes in that, but you get in those rocks, chasing those rocks around, and it's like,
That's the ticket right there.
Your dog's going to get popped, or you're going to get popped, one of the two. But
And sage grouse, I mean, it's kind of hit and miss with sage grouse, but by and large, I've never run into snakes out in the sage hunting sage grouse. So I never have to. I just hunt them early in the morning when they're still a little slow. So, or you hope they're slow.
Right.
So.
No, because it's usually, I don't know about your temps are doing, but it's cold at night here. I was up in the mountains last weekend, and it was in the 30s every night.
Yeah, we were in southern Wyoming over in the little Snake Valley there, and it got down to 34. So not here on the Front Range. I'm in Fort Collins area, so we're good to bike below 60 these days. It's going to get colder. There's a little bit of a front moving in, so hopefully we get some precip.
Yeah,
areas.
I think the whole West could use some more precipitation. It's been pretty spotty. You know, we had a little cold front blow through a week ago, and it got cold and it rained all day long for a couple days, but now it's dry as a bone out there again, and it is what it is. But well, that's cool, man. I wish I could do more early season bird hunting. The Eastman stuff kind of keeps me busy chasing
Yeah, you got other things.
Chasing big game around, which is, first world problems, right? I got to give up upland bird hunting to go chase elk. So
right.
Big deal. But no, it's fun. And I'm going to be in the same boat. I think I might take a little time in the morning and go see if I can kill some doves and maybe take that young dog out and see if we can get him a couple dove retrieves, just me and him. But we'll see.
Sure.
We'll see.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Yeah, then waterfowl. We'll see if they come down.
Did you guys have you guys end up having some birds last year? Not really.
It was pretty rough last year. Some private land that I hunt didn't even get water last year, so there were no ponds. There was nothing to hunt. So we got pretty good public land duck hunting in Colorado. The wildlife management area systems along with Platte are pretty good. It's a reservation system, and it can be damn good. A lot of the wildlife areas get early season. We get some pretty good duck hunting, and then late when it freezes up, it gets really good on the river. But we just didn't get the birds down. But goose hunting, you're paying for leases for the most part. So it's hard to knock on a door and get permission to go goose hunting. So I did a bunch of scouting when I first moved here, and borderline begged people. I was giving, hey, here's some antelope sausage, tried to bribe them to let me go kill some of their geese. Like, come on, they're eating it great, It's like they either had it already leased out or they just didn't want to hassle with the hunters. So, but upland birds, you can still knock on doors and get permission. It's getting harder and harder. You probably grew up, in a landscape that you just go out and knock on doors. My grandpa was a gas truck driver for Standard Oil back in the day. So he knew everybody, so I could go anywhere. Yeah, I always said FedEx drivers, UPS drivers, the mailman, and the gas truck drivers are the ones that have the best hunting. if they want to use it, they know everybody.
No, that is the truth. That is the truth. Yeah, it's definitely changed. When I moved out here, 15 years ago now, I could goose hunt anywhere I wanted in a pretty much a 3-county radius. It was, and it's not like that anymore. I talked to the guys that still live back there in Michigan, and it's the same thing. They're either leasing stuff or they're competing with leasing, or they've gotten out of it because of that. And, we have a couple small leases here, and it had to do with like landowners, maybe not wanting to have to mess with dealing with hunting permission or whatever anymore. And it's worked out, but I would hate to see it get to the point where every piece of ground that around you have to lease to hunt. Yeah. Because it's at the point now where if somebody gives me a holler and says, hey, especially kids, if there's some birds down there, saw a bunch of birds, down there on that ground you got leased. Could I go hunt it? And it's like, yeah, if I don't have plans to hunt it, or I can't, if I have plans to hunt it, why don't you come with me? But if I can't hunt it, go for it. I don't think I've told anybody no to the point where, unless it was I had a plan to be in there or something like that, and it wouldn't work out.
Sure.
But otherwise, it's like, I think too many guys are leasing up ground just to keep other people out. And
I think that's a fair point.
I understand it. I mean, I do. I get it, because you've got to have opportunity. But at the same time, it's like there's room to do both, in my opinion, where if you have a lease and you got Joe Blow that wants to hunt it on his day off on a Wednesday, and you're not going to be able to hunt it for whatever, either take him with you or let him go hunt it.
Let him go, yeah.
And I'll probably get yelled at or argued with for that. But I think in the long run, if we're not trying to recruit and retain hunters, we're cutting our nose off to spite our face.
I think that's spot on. And it's a good thing for all the public access programs that we have and the landowners that engage in them. That's certainly something at the TRCP we do a lot. We work with farm bill programs, encouraging open fields and block management, walk-in access in Wyoming, whatever it's called in any state, to try to maximize those opportunities, because people have to have a place to go. You can't recruit them into a pay-to-play system. Not everybody, anyway. So I'm with you. I get it, but there's kind of a threshold where we need, where there can be too much of one thing or another, and the public lands are getting full. COVID taught us that.
Oh my gosh.
Certainly some of my honey holes have been hot spotted. Unfortunately, not every podcaster is like you. And I have slipped a few times and said, when I say the Sandhills, that's a big ass piece of ground, that's
big area.
That's a region. I'm not saying where to go, but I have heard on podcasts hot spotting of where I go, and it really irritates me.
Yeah,
but
no, you can't.
People have to kind of figure it out on their own too.
Yeah, you can't do
that. We need lots of public lands to accommodate, the new hunters coming on and some of us that are getting up there in age. But I'm with you. I understand why some people lease things up and why landowners lease it out. Right. They're trying to make a living too.
To make a living and trying to control access. If you lease it to one person and they control access, that's one less headache for a landowner to have to deal with. And so, and it's.
Whereas block management in Montana or walk-in access, you just don't know.
Anybody hear nightmares from landowners that have stuff enrolled in programs that it's like state may not have the budget to patrol or to manage all of those areas, and so it's kind of up to the landowner to be like, hey, I got dudes driving all over the place out here, or in places I don't want them. And the state doesn't have the budget really to do much about it.
They can't keep their eyes on everything. The average game warden probably has hundreds of thousands of acres they're responsible for. Same thing with the biologists.
Well, exactly.
It's a big
office. Played that game. You know exactly what that is.
Yeah. And, I've policed hunters in the field. I think it's incumbent on all of us when you see somebody doing something wrong, don't run up and, yell at them and scream and call them dirty names and all that good stuff, although that's comes to the top of the list sometimes. But, trying to educate them. It's like, look, put yourself in this guy's shoes, or this woman's shoes that owns this ranch, and they're just trying to be good to us hunters. And you're throwing trash out here. You're cutting cookies in the whatever you're doing, you're cutting ruts in the road and driving off the roads. Don't do that. You're making it bad for everybody. We don't need any more black eyes. That's for sure.
No, I completely agree. And you talk about public spots being soaked up with COVID. You're right. I had a little honey hole for trout fishing. Really, really great cutthroat stream. And I went in there this year, took my wife in there, took a day off around our anniversary and said, let's go trout fishing, and we went down there and I saw 30 different vehicles coming in and out of there, on the way in and on the way out. Only one plate was from Wyoming. And I'm not complaining about tourists. We need those tourism dollars. But I'm thinking, how in the world did you find this spot?
How'd you even find it?
This is not something that's just like, there's no signs. This is not something that you go and you go just drive out and go, oh, look at this. You have to go hunt that spot. You have to go find it. Yeah. And there were boot tracks up and down the bank. And I'm getting refusal rises from cutthroats and I'm going, something's off here. These fish are.
Yeah. What's going on?
And it's all it is just an increased appetite for recreation is what it is. And public.
Which is a good thing. There's a threshold to that too. But, I think everybody's complaining now. Because they're seeing people in their favorite spots, but we're good.
Spoiled.
Yeah, we are. Spoiled.
We've been spoiled for a long time. Where guys like you and I have had stuff to ourselves, or we've had little honey holes, and nobody's around. Well, guess what? There's more folks on the landscape, and they're looking to recreate, and they're going to find your spots. So that patience factor, like
Eventually
what you said,
they are.
have some patience, and give people some grace, I think is pretty important too. But
yeah.
Well, Ed, I appreciate your time very, very much, and we're going to have to do another one of these when we get together to hunt. We'll sit down and do a hunt recap podcast or something like that.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, we never even got into the politics of Sage Grouse, which is probably a good thing.
I think that might be a good thing. We might save that for an after hunt discussion, but.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll kick that around the campfire there when we're out hunting. And we can do it. We can do a loop back on the merits of the permit system, because we are going to be operating under that the current regulations this year, which is a 2-week season, 2 birds, 4 in possession, and that may change next year. We'll see. There are merits to those systems, but again, to me, the continued, changing of harvest seasons and restricting harvest is just a sign that we're getting something wrong on the habitat side, and we got to do better. So I think this documentary that you're working on is going to be fantastic to highlight some of these issues and talk about solutions and how we can reverse. Well,
and that's the big thing, and I think we need to definitely hit on that. Is how can we fix this? Because I think you're right. What we're doing right now with talking about limiting harvest and doing those things, I think that's a Band-Aid. And I think to really stop the hemorrhaging, we've got to address habitat. And I think we get into that and we get into the politics and we just let her rip. And after we do a hunt, and now it'll be fun. And I'm really excited to get together and chase some birds in a couple weeks.
Me too, my friend. Look forward to it. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time.